March 2018. A bulletproof Mercedes speeds through the streets of Mitchell's Plain. Inside, Jerome "Donkie" Booysen grips the steering wheel as gunfire erupts around him. The vehicle shudders, riddled with bullets. Glass explodes, metal screams. This is the fourth assassination attempt in 12 months. But Booysen survives. Again. How does a man survive 9 assassination attempts? And why does half of Cape Town want him dead, while the other half calls him the sheriff? The answer lies buried in the blood-soaked streets of the Cape Flats, where poverty breeds desperation, and desperation breeds monsters. To understand Jerome Booysen, you need to understand Belhar, a forgotten corner of Cape Town where apartheid's architects dumped thousands of colored families like unwanted cargo. Here, in the late 1990s, 2 brothers ran a small taxi business. Jerome and Michael Booysen weren't gangsters then. They were businessmen trying to make an honest living in a place where honest meant vulnerable. The 28's gang saw opportunity. They wanted protection money, a tax on survival. When the Booysen brothers refused, the threats began, then the violence. The brothers faced a choice that confronts every businessman in the Cape Flats: pay, leave, or fight. They chose to fight. In 1999, they formed the Sexy Boys, a name that sounds almost absurd until you realize it was born from blood. They aligned themselves with the 26's prison gang, trading independence for muscle. What started as self-defense quickly mutated into something darker. On a winter night in June 1999, that transformation became complete. Jason Idas was found dead in Chestnut Place, Belhar. Police later recovered a massive weapons cache linked to the killing. Michael Booysen and his crew were arrested. By 2003, Michael was serving life for murder. But Jerome walked free. The Sexy Boys had lost their leader, but they'd found something more dangerous. A survivor who'd learned that in Cape Town's underworld, violence wasn't just a tool. It was the language. For years after Michael's imprisonment, the Sexy Boys seemed to fade. The Scorpions, South Africa's elite crime unit, had decimated their leadership. Most people thought the gang was finished. Jerome Booysen disappeared into the shadows, lying low while Cape Town's underworld reshuffled its deck. Then, in 2012, everything changed. Cyril Bika, a major player in Cape Town's nightclub security racket, was dead. Within weeks, a new company emerged, Specialized Protection Services. The owners? Jerome Booysen, businessman Mark Liffman, and security mogul Andre Naudet. On paper, it looked legitimate, a security firm providing bouncers and protection for Cape Town's thriving nightlife. The reality was pure extortion. Here's how it worked. Clubs, bars, restaurants, they all needed protection. Not from criminals, but from Specialized Protection Services itself. Pay the fee, and your venue operates smoothly. Refuse, and suddenly your patrons are harassed, your staff threatened, your windows mysteriously shattered. The message was crystal clear. In Cape Town's nightlife, Booysen and his partners weren't just providing security. They were the threat you needed security from. Violence in the city spiked, then suddenly dropped. Not because crime decreased, but because resistance ended. Everyone paid. The boardroom had merged with the streets, and Jerome Booysen sat at the head of the table. By 2017, the empire was pulling in millions. Booysen had transformed from a Belhar taxi operator into one of Cape Town's most feared power brokers. He had properties across the city, from modest houses in the Cape Flats to upmarket investments in the northern suburbs. Luxury cars filled his garages. Mercedes, BMWs, vehicles worth more than most South Africans earn in a lifetime. And always surrounding him, an army of enforcers dressed in black. The Men in Black, who became his signature. These weren't your typical gang members. They wore suits, carried business cards, attended meetings in boardrooms. But underneath the corporate veneer, they were soldiers in Booysen's army. At meetings, they would stand guard while Booysen negotiated deals that blurred the line between business and brutality. 1 minute discussing quarterly profits, the next ordering a beating for an uncooperative club owner. Then came the moment that would define him. During a heated confrontation over a towing company dispute in 2019, witnesses claim Booysen looked his rival in the eye and declared, "I am the sheriff of Cape Town." The boast would come back to haunt him. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a declaration of war against anyone who thought Cape Town's streets belonged to someone else. August 18th, 2017. Brian Weinstein lies dead in his Constantia mansion, the steroid kingpin, a man who supplied performance enhancers to gangsters and athletes alike, had been executed in his own home. Multiple gunshots, professional, efficient, the kind of killing that sends a message. The murder shocked South Africa. Constantia wasn't the Cape Flats. This was where cabinet ministers lived, where CEOs built fortresses, where high walls and private security were supposed to guarantee safety. The streets had names like Brommersvlei and Southern Cross Drive, a world away from the bullet-scarred corners of Belhar and Mitchell's Plain. But walls can't stop ambition, and Weinstein had something Booysen's crew wanted. What exactly? The prosecution claims it was about power, territory, and eliminating competition. But there were whispers of more: steroid supply lines worth millions, connections to international crime syndicates, secrets that powerful people wanted buried, along with Weinstein's body. The investigation reads like a criminal symphony. 16 people would eventually be charged, including Jerome Booysen, Mark Liffman, and their enforcer, William Red Stevens. The state alleged an elaborate conspiracy. Weeks of planning, stolen vehicles for getaway cars, burner phones, safe houses. This wasn't gang violence. It was organized crime operating at its most sophisticated level. The Weinstein murder marked a turning point. The authorities couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. The violence had spilled out of the townships and into the suburbs. The gang war wasn't just a Cape Flats problem. It was a Cape Town crisis. The wealthy could no longer pretend the violence was someone else's problem, happening somewhere else, to someone else's children. In December 2020, police moved. Booysen, Liffman, Stevens, and others were arrested for Weinstein's murder. They posted bail, $100,000 each, and walked free pending trial. But freedom in Cape Town's underworld is relative. Days after making bail, Booysen was shot at again. The war wasn't pausing for legal proceedings. February 2021 should have been about building legal defenses. Instead, it became a month of blood. First came the drug bust. Police raided properties in Durbanville and Belleville, uncovering what they claimed was a massive mandrax operation. The accusations were staggering: 96 charges of drug trafficking and racketeering. According to investigators, Booysen had been running a syndicate that manufactured methaqualone pills in middle-class suburbs and distributed them to the Cape Flats' desperate users. Booysen's lawyer protested. The properties were rented, not owned. The drugs belonged to tenants, not his client. But the asset forfeiture unit wasn't convinced. They froze 18 properties, painting a picture of an empire built on poison. Then came the bullets. William Red Stevens, Booysen's longtime enforcer, his co-accused in the Weinstein murder, was driving through Kryfontein when assassins struck. The 27's gang member who'd allegedly carried out dozens of hits himself was cut down in a burst of gunfire. One co-accused down, 15 to go. March brought more death. Jason Mates, accused of driving a getaway car in the Weinstein hit, was murdered. October claimed Anthony Amir van der Watt, another alleged driver. The witness list was shrinking. The accused were being executed faster than the courts could try them. But who was pulling the trigger? Enter Nafiz Modak, Booysen's former ally turned bitter enemy. Once they'd worked the same rackets, divided the same territories. But greed has no friends, and by 2017, Modak wanted what Booysen had. He formed his own security company, challenged Booysen's monopoly, and recruited gangs like the Junkie Funky Kids and Terrible West Siders. The nightclub security war had begun. What followed was carnage dressed in corporate clothing. Both sides claimed to be legitimate businessmen, but their negotiations were conducted with bullets. A trendy Longstreet club refuses Modak's protection. Windows shatter at 3 a.m. A Sea Point venue signs with Booysen. Their manager's car explodes in the parking lot. The battlefield stretched from the townships to the city center, from dive bars in Mitchell's Plain to exclusive lounges in Camps Bay. Venues became battlegrounds. Innocent bystanders became casualties. On any given weekend night, while young people danced and drank, enforcers lurked in VIP sections, planning their next move. Bouncers weren't checking IDs. They were soldiers holding territory. The red rope at the door wasn't about exclusivity. It was a battle line. The violence was so intense that even hardened criminals started choosing sides not based on loyalty, but on survival. Small-time gangsters found themselves caught between titans, forced to declare allegiance or face elimination. The junky funky kids, the terrible West Siders, the Americans, the hard livings, every gang in Cape Town was being pulled into the vortex. The police tried to contain it, but corruption ran deep. A court judgment would later expose horrific and deep-rooted collusion between officers and gangsters. The very people meant to stop the violence were profiting from it. Some cops were on Booysen's payroll, others on Modak's. Crime intelligence officers sold information to the highest bidder. Dockets disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories after late-night visits. The Western Cape Gang Monitor reported that conviction rates for gang crimes sat at a pathetic 2 to 3%. The system wasn't failing. It was working exactly as the gangsters had designed it to. In this climate of fear and failure, Jerome Booysen didn't just survive, he thrived. Every failed prosecution made him stronger. Every dead rival meant more territory. Every corrupt cop meant another layer of protection. But even sheriffs have families. March 2023. Joel Booysen, Jerome's son, arrives at a gate in Belhar, the same streets where his father built an empire. Gunmen open fire. He escapes, but barely. 2 months later, May 2023, Joel is in Greenpoint, far from the Cape Flats, in a place where tourists sip wine and watch sunsets. But there's no safety in geography when your surname is Booysen. Attackers strike again. This time, he's hit. Blood on the pavement of a trendy neighborhood. He survives, but the message is clear. The sins of the father are visiting the son. June 2023. Janino Booysen, Jerome's other son, is ambushed in Paro. It's broad daylight. Families are shopping, children playing nearby. The gunmen don't care. Bullets spray across the street like deadly rain. A young boy caught in the crossfire is wounded. Another innocent casualty in a war he never chose. His crime? Being in the wrong place when the wrong surname drove by. The anti-gang unit investigates, but everyone knows investigations mean nothing when witnesses won't talk and evidence has a price. Think about what it means to be Jerome Booysen's son. You didn't choose your father. You didn't build his empire or pull his triggers, but you wear his name like a target on your back. Every public appearance is a risk. Every drive could be your last. Your father called himself the sheriff, but you're the one serving the life sentence, always looking over your shoulder, always wondering if today is the day his enemies collect on debts you never incurred. The attacks on his sons reveal something crucial about Cape Town's gang wars. There are no civilians, only targets and future targets. Family, friends, anyone connected becomes fair game in a conflict where the rules were written in blood and revenge is the only currency that matters. The violence is generational, passed down like a cursed inheritance from father to son, from one era to the next. June 11th, 2025. Andre Naudet drives through Paro, perhaps thinking about his upcoming court date, perhaps planning his defense in the Weinstein trial. He never sees the ambush coming. Gunmen riddle his vehicle with bullets. Another co-accused dead. Another funeral before a trial. The Weinstein case has now lost 5 of its accused to assassination. The Western Cape High Court announces the trial will continue regardless. Justice, they insist, will prevail. But what kind of justice is possible when defendants are being executed in the streets? Mark Liffman had been murdered in George just months earlier. The empire Booysen, Liffman, and Naudet built together was collapsing in spectacular violence. The partners who once monopolized Cape Town's protection rackets were being eliminated one by one. As of today, Jerome Booysen sits in jail awaiting trial. His drug syndicate case, mothballed for years, has been postponed indefinitely. The Weinstein murder trial stretches toward late 2025, delayed by the chronic shortage of judges that plagues Cape Town's courts. He maintains his innocence, claims the drugs weren't his, insists the murders were someone else's doing. But innocence is a luxury in Cape Town's underworld. And Booysen knows better than most that in the Cape Flats, trials don't always end in courtrooms. There's a cruel irony in Jerome Booysen's story. He started as a businessman trying to protect himself from gangsters. He ended as the gangster other businessmen needed protection from. The victim became the perpetrator. The hunted became the hunter. The man who once fought extortion became extortion itself. This is what happens when law and order collapse, when police become accomplices, when courts can't convict, and when poverty makes crime the only ladder out of hell. The Cape Flats didn't create Jerome Booysen. South Africa's history did. Apartheid built the townships, packed them with the desperate and forgotten, then acted surprised when they produced exactly what they were designed to produce: survivors who'd do anything to escape. Booysen called himself the Sheriff of Cape Town. But sheriffs are supposed to enforce the law. In Cape Town, Booysen enforced something else: the brutal reality that in a city divided between those who have everything and those who have nothing, power flows from the barrel of a gun, and fear is the only law that matters. Today, the sexy boys still operate in Belhar. The protection rackets continue. The drugs still flow from middle-class suburbs to township streets. New names replace the old, but the system remains. Because the real crime isn't what Jerome Booysen did. It's what Cape Town allowed to happen. What it continues to allow. They say Booysen survived 9 assassination attempts. But here's the thing about survival in Cape Town's underworld. It's always temporary. Every survivor is just tomorrow's target. Every sheriff is one bullet away from becoming another cautionary tale. The question isn't whether Jerome Booysen will face justice in a courtroom or a street corner. The question is whether Cape Town will ever stop producing Jerome Booysens. Whether the cycle of poverty, violence, and vengeance that turns taxi drivers into gang bosses will ever end. Look at the Cape Flats today. Look at the unemployment, the inequality, the children growing up in the same forgotten townships where the Booysen brothers made their choice decades ago. Look at them facing the same impossible decision: pay, leave, or fight.